Just answer the question, please. And remember, reaction time is a factor. Your owner puts the picture of a German Shepherd on the wall next to your bed.
Sure. If only you could see what I've seen with your eyes.
When Blade Runner was new, the future date of 2019 seemed just plausibly distant enough that if you didn't think about it too carefully, you could accept it as a date where we might have this bleak urban hellscape, or the flying cars we've been promised since the 50s, or synthetic, human-seeming organisms barely distinguishable from their makers. Now, as 2022 becomes 2023, it's harder, except for the notion of the capability, the willingness to destroy the world on which we live. Blade Runner itself is substantially different from its source material, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. But it is inspired by and linked to that initial source material and some of the questions that it raises. The settings for the two films perhaps best captured by this small section. Opening up Chapter 2. In a giant, empty, decaying building which had once housed thousands, a single TV set hawked its wares to an uninhabited room. This ownerless ruin had, before World War Terminus, been tended and maintained. Here had been the suburbs of San Francisco, a short ride by monorail rapid transit. The entire peninsula had chattered like a bird tree with life and opinions and complaints, and now the watchful owners had either died or migrated to a colony world. Mostly the former. It had been a costly war, despite the valiant predictions of the Pentagon and its smug scientific vassal, the Rand Corporation, which had, in fact, existed not far from this spot. Like the apartment owners, the corporation had departed, evidently for good. No one missed it. In addition, no one today remembered why the war had come about, or who, if anyone, had won. The dust which had contaminated most of the planet's surface had originated in no country, and no one, even the wartime enemy, had planned on it. First, strangely, the owls had died. At the time, it had seemed almost funny. The fat, fluffy white birds lying here and there, and in yards and on streets, coming out no earlier than twilight, as they had while alive. The owls escaped notice. Medieval plagues had manifested themselves in a similar way, in the form of many dead rats. This plague, however, had descended from above. After the owls, of course, the other birds followed, but by then the mystery had been grasped and understood. A meager colonization program had been underway before the war, but now that the sun had ceased to shine on Earth, the colonization entered an entirely new phase. In connection with this, a weapon of war, the synthetic freedom fighter, had been modified. Able to function on an alien world, the humanoid robot, strictly speaking the organic android, had become the mobile donkey engine of the colonization program. Under UN law, each emigrant automatically received possession of an android subtype of his choice. And by 2019, the variety of subtypes passed all understanding, in the manner of American automobiles of the 1960s. That had been the ultimate incentive of emigration. The android servant as carrot, the radioactive fallout as stick. The UN had made it easy to emigrate, difficult, if not impossible, to stay. Loitering on Earth potentially meant finding oneself abruptly classed as biologically unacceptable, a menace to the pristine heredity of the race. Once pegged as special, a citizen, even if accepting sterilization, dropped out of history. He ceased, in effect, to be part of mankind. And yet, persons here and there declined to migrate. That, even to those involved, constituted a perplexing irrationality. Logically, every regular should have emigrated already. Perhaps, deformed as it was, Earth remained familiar, to be clung to. Or possibly, the non-emigrant imagined that the tent of dust would deplete itself finally. In any case, thousands of individuals remained, most of them constellated in urban areas where they could physically see one another, take heart at their mutual presence. Those appeared to be the relatively sane ones. And in dubious addition to them, occasional peculiar entities remained in the virtually abandoned suburbs.
There's a turtle on its back in the desert. Does that make you feel sad?
One of the major strengths of a role-playing game connected to a familiar and beloved IP is the ease in which the game master and group can come to an agreement about what it is exactly that they're going to play. People will find it easier to connect in their imaginations. People will find it easier to give context and meaning to the actions they want to take as their characters. People will find it easier to create characters. But this strength is also a weakness. People can, instead of feeling freed to operate in the new universe, they can feel in some way constrained by it, whatever the IP is. So, when we have a role-playing game like Bladerunner, the first question really becomes, what can I do with it? And not in a pejorative sense of, what can you do with this except do what the movies did? But in a sense of exploration. This group, these people, myself, now, at this stage in our lives, having seen and read and explored all of this different media pertaining to this IP that we love, like, enjoy, what can we do with it? When we open Blade Runner, I think it's immediately obvious that where it draws most of its visual design language from is the approach taken for Alien, the role-playing game. In the same way as that game gave us a very cold and isolated feeling, with almost impressionistic art giving us very specific insight into the life taking place just out of shot in the movies that we enjoyed so much in that franchise. Similarly, we see the same aesthetic playing out across the pages of Blade Runner. Like the films, the images are dark, they're blurred with rain, or with smoke, or with despair, and backlit by a cold, flickering, heartless neon. Despite these obvious and striking similarities, the games also substantially differ. Where Alien offered two very divergent forms of play, the cinematic mode and the campaign mode, and offered that in three different flavors, Blade Runner very quickly, from the beginning, gets to a very particular point about the characters you are going to be playing. And while it may seem that it comes with some significant choices, really, the choice is, how will you experience the world of Blade Runner as your character? And that will make all the difference. One element that drives this home in the core rules has gotten a lot of attention already, but it might be being misinterpreted. The first 10 pages of the Game Runner section provide short and effective sections on presenting cases for the characters before focusing on the case file generation tools that will give this game a lot of variety and life in long-term play. The focus of conversation about the game, however, seems to be on a small sidebar at the bottom of the 6th of those 10 pages. The header of that is, "It's not about the case." But I suggest it might have served its point better if it had said, "It's not just about the case." Cases in Blade Runner are the fuel, the kindling, and the spark which sets the experience of the character ablaze. Without them, any introspection or in-character conversation has no connection to lived experience, emotional reaction, or fear of consequence, and instead has to be invented externally by the player out of and in response to nothing. Cases are important. The events, the characters, the locations, the situations are all very important. The character's reaction to those cases are important. They are so important, in fact, that as a principle of preparation for the Game Runner, the writers recommend that the focus of play not be on the challenge of solving the cases and allowing success and failure to be the meat of play, but rather putting the focus on the experience of investigating and interacting so that the impact of the case can go to work on the characters. Cases and dealing with them are the main thing that characters are in the setting to do. Cases and the effect of them on the characters are the main thing that players of the game are expected to explore. Cases are important. It's not just about the case, however. The core rulebook runs about 240 pages and is divided into 9 chapters. Chapter 1 runs from page 9 to page 20, covers the setting, makes it specific that this particular take on Blade Runner is taking place well after the events of the first film and about a decade before the events of the second. The last 2 pages of this chapter drive the point home very well about what it means to be a Blade Runner, what it means to play a Blade Runner in this game, and what the key themes are for play. Then we jump into Chapter 2, Your Blade Runner, which runs from page 27 to page 51 and details character creation. This is quickly followed up by Chapter 3, which is very short, just running from page 54 to page 60, which talks about the dice, the skills, and specialties. Unlike some versions of this system, which focus on a number of d6, this one uses 4 different types of dice, so more similar to the Twilight 2000 iteration. We have the d6, the d8, the d10, and the d12. These are very helpfully assigned letter grades so that we can talk about the dice in character in a way that characters might actually talk about, having received ratings of their abilities in the past by their trainers or designers. As you'd expect, rolls will result in failure, success, or critical success, where a success is defined by rolling a 6 or better, and a critical success is defined by rolling 2 or more 6s. And what makes this particular iteration interesting is, of course, that we have multiple types of dice. So a roll of 10, 11, or 12, each of those results yields 2 successes. Failure, of course, is not getting anything of 6 or higher. In such a case, a player can still push the roll, meaning they will re-roll any of the dice involved that they choose to. The original dice that they choose not to re-roll, those results will stand. You're not allowed to re-roll any one that's showing on the original roll. Further, there are advantage and disadvantage mechanisms in play. So a situation, if necessary, if even more difficult or even more challenging than the type of thing you would roll for in a standard year zero game, you can add an additional die to represent an advantage, or you can remove the smaller of your dice to represent disadvantage. As usual in the game runner is advised to consider carefully when they call for a roll. Unlike some games where you roll just to see what the dice result is and to go from there, here we roll to determine if a difficult situation is going to be overcome and what that is going to mean if it isn't. As you can see, the official dice for the game are glorious, with the origami unicorn marked on all the ones and an eye symbol for success marked on everything 6 and higher, with 10, 11, and 12 having 2 eyes. All of this in a lovely crystalline red. Obviously, you get them just for the aesthetics. They're not necessary. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 all count as success, with 10, 11, and 12 counting as 2 successes. Not terribly challenging. A roll of 1, which on the official dice shows the unicorn, results in stress in many situations, and in some specific situations, damage. But you only have to worry about that when you're pushing rolls, and that never happens, right? As an aside about pushing, for those who haven't played in a system like Year Zero, there can be a reaction to the idea of mechanisms which will allow for a re-roll, which feels like you are undoing a failure. This mechanism isn't in that category. It acknowledges the failure and builds on it. What is the reaction to that failure? That's the push. These characters can dig down and overcome a negative situation. Maybe. This is drawn from what we see in films where the camera will zoom in and focus on a moment of failure, broken fingers, being knocked off a ledge, not quite jumping all the way across the chasm and scrambling to get up and over or not. If we simply roll and have success or failure, then we don't have that ability to zoom in on those moments where what is the character going to do now in this moment where failure seems imminent? And that's what the push allows us to do. Is this the case where the character is able to scrabble their way up back on top of the building? Or is this a situation where if Roy Batty didn't help them out, they would have fallen to their death? So what that really means is that for newcomers to gaming or old hands at gaming alike, these Year Zero games are opportunities to focus on and practice and get better at framing rolls so that what we're rolling about is actually what we are trying to imagine together. This brings us to Chapter 4, the Combat and Chases chapter, where it pays a lot of attention to these 2 essential elements from the films, right? As a part of investigation where we have Bladerunners hunting down to retire or apprehend replicants. So this runs from page 64 to page 81. And if you're interested, there are also cards available which enable you to handle initiative quickly and to see what different maneuvers are and what that requires of you. So we've got aerial chases and ground chases and that sort of stuff. So Combat and Chases is a pretty meaty chapter. Nothing too out of the ordinary if you've played a Year Zero game before. And of course, this time with the die pools being generally just 2 dice, or maybe 3 dice, or maybe 1 die, depending on the situation, resolution is pretty quick. It's very easy to look down and see if you're in desperate straits, if you need to push, and that sort of thing. The next chapter, Chapter 5, A Tale of Two Cities, gets into the official setting for the game so far, which is Los Angeles. And it runs from page 93 to page 124. It goes through all the sectors of the provided map. And I find the sections are long enough to be useful and not too long to be a distraction or a delay for preparation. So it's quite well done there. The next chapter is the powers that be, and it goes into what you might expect. There are government agencies, the media, criminal enterprises, etc., etc. So particularly focusing on the Wallace Corporation, which stepped in and took over Tyrell and is the force that has enabled replicants to come back as a more or less accepted force on Earth in its year of 2037. This brings us to the last 3 chapters of the core book. Chapter 7 is called Working the Case, and it sets you up to be able to work the case confidently and competently from the perspective of being an investigator. It explores the Rep Detect unit itself, the Bladerunner unit, talks about the new way things are in this different era than we have seen before prior to Blade Runner 2049. It talks about the different divisions. It talks about the different resources you'll have access to and using your assets as an investigator to bring about successful conclusions to your case. What is the standard procedure, right? How do you work a crime scene? As usual, these sections are very short. They're to the point. We could describe them as punchy. You can read them quickly and come away from them with a sense of how to present the character until it becomes second nature. Chapter 8 is one of those chapters which is often a favorite, the detailed gear section, including pictures and diagrams and breakdowns of a variety of useful tools for this very focused game, being a Blade Runner. This chapter maintains that sort of in-universe feel that a lot of the rest of the book carries. You're still being spoken to directly from a source, but at the same time, it feels like it could be the manufacturer itself. You could feel like you're on a training mission or that you are qualifying for a new weapon or a new piece of gear so that you can maybe buck for one of those promotions that everybody seems to want. And that sets us up for the last chapter of the book.
Chapter 9 immediately reminds us of the key points of Chapter 1, and directly states that including one or more of the game's themes is a goal for each scene. Like the films, the atmosphere and intention of play is not an occasional inclusion. It is the context of each moment. People like to parrot that role-playing games are a conversation, but few carry on to clarify what that conversation might be about for a particular game, and more importantly, how it might be about that. Blade Runner makes an effort to frame that incomplete observation, role-playing games are a conversation, into a more complete and useful guideline, and it does that, or tries to, in Chapter 9. Though perhaps it's accidentally aimed more at gamers with a wide experience of games and approaches than the rest of the book is. I could, probably should, and definitely will say more on this topic, but I'm going to save that for its own video. Overall, I find that this game is one that does a lot of things the way that I like, and I've praised it fairly effusively throughout this video. That does not mean that I'm left with nothing to critique. In broad strokes, I find that the methods given can sometimes be at odds with the rhetoric that is used, particularly in the notion that the goal of this approach is to create a story, when the tools provided and most of the procedures given are for experiencing snapshots of the life of the character. These things are not the same. Also, I felt that the one glaring omission from the book, and in this chapter, is specificity about how the game's reliance on rolling only when it is necessary ties directly into how the players and game runner can investigate and experience the effects of these investigations without each step and stage of a case being forced into a challenge that puts success or failure into a spotlight. It can simply and often be assumed that if the characters can arrive at a location, that they have the requisite ability to uncover and identify what is and is not a clue. It's in the determination of what those clues mean that the dual nature of solving the case and exposing the themes of the game are met and explored. I also found that there was an overuse of direct quotations from the movies, and sometimes the connection between those quotations and the topic that they're appended to is far too tenuous to make the inclusion worth it. The writers and designers are obviously, and in the text, admittedly fans of the films, and it shows. It's just, for my eyes, sometimes it shows so much that the light of their passion can blind you to the rest of the words on the page. Still, despite these critiques, Bladerunner is a welcome addition to my library. As a game that uses investigation as part of the setting and identity of the characters, I find that it gives tremendously useful detail to the players for how to bring that out in play, and in play that they direct. And it gives extremely useful procedures to the game runner for making the investigations matter, and matter on multiple levels. The game covers generating cases in general, through identifying the constituent parts and the investigative procedures that match those parts, paying careful attention to the pressures of time and the pressures of resources. It also provides ways to generate cases randomly, both by taking random charts literally as printed and by taking the options as inspirations to work with. If I were to voice another critique, it would be that the charts for critical injury, for stress, for case generation, they could all clarify that they need not be taken verbatim, especially for newcomers to role-playing games. It can take some time before the realization strikes that the chart entries are suggestions, not requirements. It also takes time to develop comfort using things like these entries as inspiration for what happens or what's going on or what is the case, rather than specific results. And encouragement for learning to do this, written directly in the core rules, can go a long way. Finally, the production quality of everything, from the cards to the handouts to the softcover starter booklets to this book to the dice, is excellent. Good paper, not too much gloss, not too little, solid box, good clarity in the dice, clean paint, solid binding. Where I found something to be concerned about is that the print is a little on the small side, leaving a lot of space in the page for art in many cases, but just empty space in more cases. This is exacerbated if you're trying to use a PDF on a portable device. The pages are heavy enough with these different layers of text and other items that a decent laptop with a Core i7 will still struggle a bit to display the pages occasionally. On a phone, even one as, mighty and large as a Galaxy S21 or later, the text is often too small to read in a column approach, and of course it's separated around the page in boxes, so you can't really approach it as columns, with automatic sizing anyway, which means that you're spending a lot of time moving the text around on the screen to be able to read it, or changing the orientation of your phone in order to get as much of an item, a box, as you might want, because sometimes it's oriented all the way across the page, and sometimes it's a small box that would fit inside a column. So you're juggling this data a lot on a smaller item, such as a phone. But even on a large and powerful device like the Galaxy Tab S8 Ultra, the text size, while it doesn't present problems because of its size, it does still leave you with lots and lots of scrolling and empty space. So given these layout decisions, all of these problems, if they are problems, they were avoidable. So I find it's hard to come down fully on the aesthetics being all positive. On the plus side, the text is well indexed and linked in the PDF, and it's easy to find things either directly from pull-down menu or just by tapping an item in the index itself. Right? So very well indexed. And of course, before you get comfortable with where everything is in the books, then a keyword search is easy. So the chunks of text themselves, regardless of the way that they were put on the page, they are direct and with experience playing the game and other Year Zero games and other games beyond that. They speak volumes far beyond the word count. So that brings us to the end of this overview of Bladerunner from Free League. And in the spirit of full disclosure, Free League did provide me with access to the PDFs of the core rules and the starter set for review. This isn't my normal approach, and after I read them, I was really well taken with them. So I went ahead and I purchased the products for myself. I did this because I really felt they were worth it. These were things that I definitely wanted the physical products for, and so totally worth it. And I haven't come to feel better about receiving review copies in exchange for a review. So I prefer to review games that I have purchased and played. And I prefer to do overviews of games that I have purchased and read and analyzed and talked about with other people. So getting the copies myself made it much easier to approach this overview on my own terms. Anyway, I'm looking forward to what comes of playing this game with a group of appropriate individuals, and when that is in motion, I'll be sharing more videos about the gameplay and how the design decisions facilitate fast, gritty, and emotional play, with lots of points for tough decision for the players, in character, as character. Anyway, until the next time, take care.